STALKY by Rudyard Kipling. This happens to be the first story that was written concerning the adventures and performances of three schoolboys, STALKY, McTurk, and Beetle. For some reason or other, it was never put into the book called STALKY Co. that was made out of the stories. A certain amount of it, I am sorry to say, is founded on fact, though that is no recommendation, and the only moral that I can see in it is that when for any reason you happen to get into a tight place, you have a better chance of coming out of it comfortably if you keep your head than if you get excited and don't stop to think. And then it was a boy's voice, curiously level, and even De Vitter said we were beastly funks not to help. And I said there were too many chaps in it to suit us, besides there's bound to be a mess somewhere or other with old De Vitter in charge, wasn't I right, Beetle? And anyhow, it's a silly biznai bung through what'll they do with the beastly cows. When they've got you can milk a cow if shell stand still, that's all right, but driven about. You're a pig, Beetle. No, I ain't. What is the sense of driven a lot of cows up from the burrows to her, is it? They're tryin' to drive up to Tooey's farmyard at the top of the hill, empty one, where we smoked last Tuesday. It's a revenge, old Vidley chivied De Vitter twice last week for riding his ponies on the burrows, and De Vitter's goin' to lift as many of old Vidley's cattle as he can, and plant up the hill hell mucket, though with Parsons Oren and Howlett helpin' him, they'll only yell and shout and bunk if they see Vidley. We might have managed it, said McTurk, slowly turning up his coat collar against the rain that swept over the burrows. His hair was of the dark mahogany red that goes with a certain temperament. We should, Corcoran replied with equal confidence, but they've gone into it as if it was a sort of spadger hunt. I've never done any cattle liftin', but it seems to me that one might just as well be stalky about a thing as not. The smoking vapors of the Atlantic drove in wreaths above the boys' heads. Out of the mist to windward, beyond the grey bar of the Pebble Ridge, came the unceasing roar of mile-long Atlantic rollers. To leeward, a few stray ponies and cattle, the property of the Northam potwallopers and the unwilling playthings of the boys in their leisure hours, showed through the haze. The three boys had halted by the cattle gate, which marks the limit of cultivation, where the fields come down to the burrows from Northam Hill. Beetle, shock-headed and spectacled, drew his nose to and fro along the wet top bar. McTurk shifted from one foot to the other, watching the water drain into either print, while Corcoran whistled through his teeth as he leaned against a sod bank, peering into the mist. A grown or sane person might have called the weather vile, but the boys at that school had not yet learned the national interest in climate. It was a little damp, to be sure, but it was always damp in the Easter term, and seawit they held could not give one a cold under any circumstances. Mackintoshes were things to go to church in, but crippling if one had to run at short notice across heavy country, so they waited serenely in the downpour, clad as their mothers would not have cared to see. I say, Corky, said Beetle, wiping his spectacles for the 20th time, if we aren't going to help De Vitter, what are we here for? We're goin' to watch, was the answer. Keep your eye on your uncle, and hell pull you through. It's an awful biznai driving cattle in open country, said McTurk, who, as the son of an Irish baronet, knew something of these operations. They'll have to run half over the burrows after s'pose they're ridin' Vidley's ponies. De Vitter's sure to be he's a dab on a horse. Listen, what a filthy row they're making. They'll be heard for miles. The air filled with whoops and shouts, cries, words of command, the rattle of broken golf clubs, and a clatter of hooves. Three cows with their calves came up to the cattle gate at a milchcanter, followed by four wild-eyed bullocks and two rough-coated ponies. A fat and freckled youth of 15 trotted behind them, riding bareback and brandishing a hedge-stake. De Vitter, up to a certain point, was an inventive youth with a passion for horse exercise that the Northam farmers did not encourage. Farmer Vidley, who could not understand that a grazing pony likes being galloped about, had once called him a thief, and the insult rankled, hence the raid. Come on, he cried over his shoulder. Open the gate, Corcoran, or they'll all cut back again. We've had no end of bother to get want old Vidley be wild. Three boys on foot ran up, shooing the cattle in excited and amateur fashion, till they headed them into the narrow, high-banked Devonshire lane that ran uphill. "Come on, Corcoran, it's no end of a lark," pleaded De Viter, but Corcoran shook his head. The affair had been presented to him after dinner that day as a completed scheme in which he might by favor play a minor part, and Arthur Lionel Corcoran, No. 104, did not care for lieutenancies. "You'll only be collared," he cried, as he shut the gate. "Parsons and Oren are no good in a row. You'll be collared sure as a gun, De Viter." "Oh, you're a beastly funk." The speaker was already hidden by the fog. "Hang it all," said McTurk, "it's about the first time we've ever tried a cattle lift at the Coletts." "Not much," said Corcoran firmly. "Keep your eye on your uncle." His word was law in these matters, for experience had taught them that if they maneuvered without Corcoran, they fell into trouble. "You're wrathy because you didn't think of it first," said Beetle. Corcoran kicked him thrice calmly, neither he nor Beetle changing a muscle the while. "No, I ain't, but it isn't stalky enough for me." Stalky in their school vocabulary meant clever, well-considered, and wily as applied to plans of action, and stalkiness was the one virtue Corcoran toiled after. "Same thing," said McTurk. "You think you're the only stalky chap in the call." Corcoran kicked him as he had kicked Beetle, and even as Beetle, McTurk took not the faintest notice. By the etiquette of their friendship, this was no more than a formal notice of dissent from a proposition. "They haven't thrown out any pickets," Corcoran went on. "That school prepared boys for the army. You ought to do Thatvan for apples. Tooheys farmyard may be full of farm chaps." "'Twasn't last week," said Beetle, "when we smoked in that cartshed place. It's a mile from any house too." Up went one of Corcoran's light eyebrows. "Oh, Beetle, I am so tired o' kicking you." "Does that mean it's empty now?" "They ought to have sent a fellow ahead to look. They're simply bound to be collared, and where'll they bunk to if they have to run for it? Parsons has only been here 2 terms. He don't know the lie of the country. Oren's a fat ass, and Howlett bunks from a governor vernacular for any native of Devon engaged in agricultural pursuits. As far as he can see, any De Viter's the only decent chap in the lot. Onan, I put him up to usin' Tooheys farmyard." "Well, keep your hair on," said Beetle. "What are we going to do? It's hefty damp here." "Let's think a bit." Corcoran whistled between his teeth, and presently broke into a swift, short, double shuffle. "Well, go straight up the hill, and see what happens to cut across the fields, and well lie up in the hedge, where the lane comes in by the barn where we found that dead hedgehog last term. Come on." He scrambled over the earth bank and dropped onto the rain-soaked plow. It was a steep slope to the brow of the hill, where Tooheys' barn stood. The boys took no account of stiles or footpaths, crossing field after field diagonally, and where they found a hedge bursting through it like beagles, the lane lay on their right flank, and they heard much lowing and shouting in that direction. "Well, if De Viter isn't collared," said McTurk, kicking off a few pounds of loam against a gatepost, "he jolly well ought to be." "Well, get collared too, if you go on with your nose up like that, duck you ass, and stalk along under the hedge. We can get quite close up to the barn," said Corcoran. "There's no sense in not doing a thing stalkily while you're about it." They wriggled into the top of an old hollow double hedge, less than 30 yards from the big black timbered barn with its square outbuildings. Their 10 minutes' climb had lifted them a couple of 100 feet above the burrows as the mists parted here, and there they could see its great triangle of sodden green tipped with yellow sand dunes, and fringed with white foam laid out like a blurred map below. The surge along the pebble ridge made a background to the wild noises in the lane. "What did I tell you?" said Corcoran, peering through the stems of the quickset, which commanded a view of the farmyard. 3 farm chaps getting out dung with pitchforks. It's too late to head off. De Viter wed be collared. If we showed up besides they've heard they couldn't help hearing what asses." The natives, brandishing their weapons, talked together, using many times the word collager. As the tumult swelled, they disappeared into various pens and byres. The first of the cattle trotted up to the yard gate, and De Viter felicitated his band. "That's all right," he shouted. "Oh, want old Vidley be wild. Open the gate, Oren, and whack through there pretty warm." "Saw you be in a minute," muttered McTurk, as the raiders hurried into the yard behind the cattle. they heard a shout of triumph, shrill yells of despair, saw one Devonian guarding the gate with a pitchfork, while the others, alas, captured all 4 boys. Of all the infernal, idiotic lower-second asses, said Corcoran, they haven't even taken off their housecaps. These dainty confections of primary colors were not issued, as some believe, to encourage housebride or esprit de corps, but for purposes of identification from afar, should the wearer break bounds or laws. That is why in time of war anyone but an idiot wore his inside out. You young rascals, we've got what be doing to Muster Vidley's bullocks. Oh, we found said De Witte, who bore himself gallantly in defeat. Would you like Found they bullocks drove like that all heaven and penkin and hearted. Oh, shameful you've nigh to killed the cowslet alone stealin' they sends poor boys to jail for half o' this. That's a lie, said Beetle to McTurk, turning on the wet grass. I know, but they always say it, member, when they collared us at the monkey farm that Sunday with the apples in your topper. My aunt there goin' to lock him up and send for Vidley, Corcoran whispered, as one of the captors hurried downhill in the direction of Appledore, and the prisoners were led into the barn. But they haven't taken their names and numbers anyhow, said Corcoran, who had fallen into the hands of the enemy more than once. But they're bottled rather sickly for De Witte, said Beetle. It's one lickin' anyhow, even if Vidley don't hammer him the heads, rather hot about gate liftin' and poachin' and all that sort of thing. He won't care for cattle liftin' much. It's awfully bad for cows too to run about in milk, said McTurk, lifting one knee from a sodden primrose stuffed. What's the next move, Corky? Well, get into the old cart shed, where we smoked. It's next to the barn. We can cut across over while they're inside and climb in through the window. S'pose we're collared, said Beetle, cramming his housecap into his pocket. Caps may tumble off, so one goes into action bareheaded. That's just it, they'd never dream of any more chaps walkin' bung into the trap. Besides, we can get out through the roof. If they spot us, keep your eye on your uncle. Come on, said Corcoran. A swift dash carried them to a huge clump of nettles beneath the unglazed back window of the cart shed. Its open front, of course, gave on to the barnyard. They scrambled through, dropped among the carts, and climbed up into the rudely boarded upper floor that they had discovered a week before when, in search of retirement, it covered a half of the building and ended in darkness at the barn wall. The roof tiles were broken and displaced. Through the chinks, they commanded a clear view of the barnyard, half filled with disconsolate cattle steaming sadly in the rain. You see, said Corcoran, always careful to secure his line of retreat, if they bottle us up here, we can squeeze out between these rafters, slide down the roof, and bunk. They couldn't even get out through the window. They'd have to run right round the barn now. Are you satisfied, you burbler? How you only said that to make quite sure yourself, Beetle retorted. If the boards weren't all loose, it'd kick, you growled Corcoran. No sense gettin' into a place you can't get out of. Shut up and listen. A murmur of voices reached them from the end of the attic. McTurk tiptoed thither with caution. Hyatt leads through into the barn. You can get through, come along. He fingered the boarded wall. What's the other side, said Corcoran the cautious. Hey, you idiot, they heard his boothils click on wood, and he had gone. At some time or other, sheep must have been folded in the cart shed, and an inventive farmhand sooner than take the hay round had displaced a board in the barnside to thrust fodder through. It was in no sense a lawful path, but 12 inches in the square is all that any boy needs. Look here, said Beetle, as they waited for McTurk's return. The cattle are coming in out of the wet. A brown hairy back showed some 3 feet below the half-floor, as one by one the cattle shouldered in for shelter among the carts below, filling the shed with their sweet breath. That blocks our way out, unless we get out by the roof, and that's rather too much of a drop, unless we have to, said Corcoran. They're all bung in front of the window, too. What a day we're having. Corcoran, Beetle, McTurk's whisper shook with delight. You can see I've seen there in a blue funk in the barn, and the 2 clods are mackin' fun of horrid orans tryin' to bribe and Parsons. is nearly blubbin, come and look, I am in the hayloft, get through the hole, don't make a row, beetle. Lithely they wriggled between the displaced boards into the hay, and crawled to the edge of the loft. 3 years skirmishing against a hard and unsympathetic peasantry had taught them the elements of strategy. For tactics they looked to Corcoran, but even Beetle, notoriously absent-minded, held a lock of hay before his head. As he crawled there was no haste, no betraying giggle, no squeak of excitement. They had learned by stripes the unwisdom of these things, but the conference by a root-cutter on the barn floor was deep in its own affairs. De Vitter's party promising entreating and cajoling, while the natives laughed like inquisitors. Wait till Muster Vidley and Muster Tuoise and the policemen come, was their only answer. Tease about time to go to milkin, what'll us do? You go milk, Tom, and ill stay long. Oh, the young gentleman, said the bigger of the two, who answered to the name of Abraham Muster Toohey, hem like to charge you for using his yard so free. Is fi ye'll be wopped proper racken, ye'll be askin for junkets to set in this week o' Sundays to come, but Muster Vidley hell give e the best leatherin of all hem passionful, I tell e. Tom stumped out to milk. The barn doors closed behind him, and in the fading light a great gloom fell on all but Abraham, who discoursed eloquently on Mr. Vidley, his temper and strong arm. Corcoran turned in the hay and retreated to the attic, followed by his army. No good was his verdict. I am afraid it's all up with M. We'd better get out. Yes, but look at these beastly cows, said McTurk, spitting onto a heifer's back. It'll take us a week to shove em away from the window, and that brute Tom'll hear us, he's just across the yard milkin. Tweak em, then, said Corcoran. Hang it, I am sorry to have to go though. If we could get that other beast out of the barn for a minute, we might make a rescue. Well, it's no good, Tweakins. He drew forth a slim, well-worn homemade catapult. The tweaker of those days slipped a buckshot into its supple chamois leather pouch and pulled to the full stretch of the elastic. The others followed his example. They only wished to get the cattle out of their way, but seeing the backs so near, they deemed it their duty each to choose his bird, and to let fly with all their strength. They were not prepared in the least for what followed. 3 bullocks, trying to wheel amid 6 close-pressed companions, not to mention 3 calves, several carts, and all the lumber of a general-utility shed, do not turn end for end without confusion. It was lucky for the boys that they stood a little back on the floor, because one horned head, tossed in pain, flung up a loose board at the edge, and it came down lengthwise on an amazed back. Another victim floundered bodily across the shafts of a decrepit gig, smashing these, and oversetting the wheels. That was more than enough for the nerves of the assembly. With wild bellowings and a good deal of left and right butting, they dashed into the barnyard, tails on end, and began a fine free fight on them. The last cow out hooked down an old set of harness. It flapped over one eye and trailed behind her. When a companion trod on it, which happened every few seconds, she naturally fell on her knees, and being a Burrows cow, with the interests of her calf at heart, attacked the first passer-by. Half-awed but wholly delighted, the boys watched the outburst. It was in full flower before they even dreamed of a second shot. Tom came out from a byre with a pitchfork to be chased in again by the harnessed cow. A bullock floundered on the muck heap, fell, rose, and bedded himself to the belly helpless, and bellowing. The others took great interest in him. Corcoran, through the roof, scientifically tweaked a frisky heifer on the nose, and it is no exaggeration to say that she danced on her hind legs for half a minute. Abram, oh, Abram, thame bewitched. Thame rajan tess, the milk fever thave been drove, mad, oh, Abram thale horn, the bullock thale horn me, Abram. Bide till I lock the door, quoth Abraham, faithful to his trust. They heard him padlock the barn door, saw him come out with yet another pitchfork. A bullock lowered his head. Abraham ran to the nearest pigpen, where loud squeakings told that he had disturbed the peace of a large family. Beetle snapped Corcoran, go in and get those asses out quick, well, keep the cows happy. A people sitting in darkness and the shadow of monumental lickings, too depressed to be angry with De Vitter, heard a voice from on high saying, come up here. Come on, come up, there's a way out. They shinned up the loft stanchions without a word, found a bootheel which they were bidden to take for guide, and squeezed desperately through a hole in darkness, to be hauled out by Corcoran. "Have you got your caps? Did you give 'em your names and numbers?" "Yes, no." "That's all right, drop down here. Don't stop to jaw over the cart through that window and bunk get out." De Vitter needed no more. They heard him squeak as he dropped among the nettles, and through the roof chinks they watched 4 slight figures disappear into the rain. Tom and Abraham from byre and pigpen exhorted the cattle to keep quiet. "By gum," said Beetle, "that was Stalky. How did you think of it?" "It was the only thing to do. Anybody could have seen that." "Hadn't we better bunk too now?" said McTurk uneasily. "Why, we ray all right. We haven't done anything. I want to hear what old Vidley will say." "Stop tweakin' turkey. Let 'em cool off. Golly, how that heifer danced. I swear I didn't know cows could be so lively. We're only just in time." "My hat, here's Vidley and Tooey," said Beetle, as the 2 farmers strode into the yard. "Gloats, oh gloats, fids, oh fids, hefty fids, and gloats to us," said Corcoran. These words in their vocabulary expressed the supreme of delight. Gloats implied more or less of personal triumph. Fids was felicity in the abstract, and the boys were tasting both that day. Last joy of all, they had had the pleasure of Mr. Vidley's acquaintance, albeit he did not love them. Tooey was more of a stranger, his orchards lying over near to the public road. Tom and Abraham together told a tale of stolen cattle maddened by overdriving, of cows sure to die in calving, and of milk that would never return, that made Mr. Vidley swear for 3 consecutive minutes in the speech of North Devon. "'Tess too bad, said Tooey consolingly. "Let's 'ope they 'aven't took no great 'arm. They be wonderful wild, though." "'Tess all well for you, Tooey, that sells them dom collegers 70 quart a week." 80, Tooey replied with the meek triumph of one who has underbidden his neighbor on public tender. "But that's no odds to me. You'm free to leather 'em Sammy, as if they was yer own sons. On my barn floor shall leather 'em." "Generous old pig," said Beetle. "De Vitter ought to have stayed for this." "They'm all safe and to rights," said the officious Abraham, producing the key. "Racken Usl'll come in and hold 'em for you." "Hey, the cows are fair ragin, still Usl'll have to run for it." The barn being next to the shed, the boys could not see that stately entry, but they heard. "Gone and hided in the hay ayers." "They'm proper afraid," cried Abraham. Rout un out, roared Vidley, rattling a stick impatiently on the root cutter. "Oh, my aunt," said Corcoran, standing on 1 foot. Shut the door, I tell 'ee. Racken us can find un in the dark. Us don't want un boltin' like rabbits under our elbows." The big barn door closed with a clang. "My gum," said Corcoran, which was always his war oath. In time of action, he dropped down and was gone for perhaps 20 seconds. "And that's all right," he said, returning at a gentle saunter. What McTurk almost shrieked, for Corcoran in the shed below waved a large key. "Stalks, frabjous stalks, bottled M." "All 4" was the reply, and Beetle fell on his bosom. "Yis, thame, so's to say, like locked up. If you're a-goin' to laugh, Beetle, I shall have to kick you again." "But I must." Beetle was blackening with suppressed mirth. "You won't do it here, then?" He thrust the already limp Beetle through the cart-shed window. It sobered him. One cannot laugh on a bed of nettles. Then Corcoran stepped on his prostrate carcass, and McTurk followed. Just as Beetle would have risen, so he was upset, and the nettles painted on his cheek a likeness of hideous eruptions. "Thought that I'd cure you," said Corcoran with a sniff. Beetle rubbed his face desperately with dock leaves and said nothing. All desire to laugh had gone from him. They entered the lane. Then a clamor broke from the barn, a compound noise of horse-like kicks, shaking of door panels, and 5-fold yells. "They've found it out," said Corcoran. "How strange," he sniffed again. "Let 'em," said Beetle. "No one can hear 'em. Come on up to call." "What a brute you are, Beetle. You only think of your beastly self. Those cows want milkin', poor dears. Hear 'em low," said McTurk. "Go back and milk 'em yourself." Then Beetle danced with pain We shall miss Calover hanging about like this, and I've got 2 black marks this week already. Then y'all have fatigue drill on Monday, said Corcoran. Come to think of it, I've got 2 black marks Aussie him. This is serious, this is hefty serious. I told you, said Beetle with vindictive triumph, and we want to go out after that hawk's nest on Monday. We shall be swatting dumbbells, though all your fault if Wed bunked with DeVitter at first. Corcoran paused between the hedgerows. Hold on a shake, and don't burble. Keep your eye on Uncle. Do you know, I believe someone's shut up in that barn. I think we ought to go and see. Don't be a giddy idiot, come on up to call. But Corcoran took no notice of Beetle. He retraced his steps to the head of the lane, and lifting up his voice cried, as in bewilderment, "Hullo, who's there? What's that row about? Who are you?" "Oh, Peter," said Beetle, skipping and forgetting his anguish in this new development. "Hoy hoy air, let us out." The answers came muffled and hollow from the black bulk of the barn, with renewed thunders on the door. "Now play up," said Corcoran. "Turkey, you keep the cows busy. Member that we've just discovered we don't know anything. Be polite." Beetle. They picked their way over the muck and held speech through a crack by the door hinge. 3 more genuinely surprised boys the steady rain never fell upon, and they were so difficult to enlighten they had to be told again and again by the captives with it. "We've been air for hours and hours. That was Tooey and the cows to milk and all. That was Vidley the door she blued against us and jammed herself. That was Abraham." "Yes, we can see that it's jammed on this side," said Corcoran. "How careless you chaps are. Oppen unbash her oppen with a rock, young gentleman. The cows are milkiated and ragin', haven't you boys no sense?" Seeing that McTurk from time to time tweaked the cattle into renewed caperings, it was quite possible that the boys had some knowledge of a sort, but Mr. Vidley was rude. They told him so through the door, professing only now to recognize his voice. "Humor if can I paid 7 and 6 for the padlock," said Tooey. "Never mind him, Tess, only old Vidley. Be you gwain to stay a prisoner and captive for the sake of a lock, Tooey?" "I am shamed of wrote unoppen, young gentleman. 'Twas a God's own mercy. You heard us, Tooey, you a borned miser." "It'll be a long job," said Corcoran. "Look here, it's near our Calover. If we stay to help you, well miss it. We've come miles out of our way already after you." "Tell ye master, then, what kept Ian errand o' mercy, like ill tal unto, when I bring the milk tomorrow," said Tooey. "That's no good," said Corcoran. "We may be licked twice over. By then y'all have to give us a letter." McTurk, backed against the barn wall, was firing steadily and accurately into the brown of the herd. Yes, come down to my house. My missus shall write a beauty, young gentleman. She makes out the bills ill. Give just such a letter o' recommendation as I'd give to my own son, if only you can humor the lock." "Never mind the lock," Vidley wailed. "Let me get to me poor cows, for they'm dead." They went to work with ostentatious rattlings and wrenchings, and a good deal of the byplay that Corcoran always loved. At last, noise of unlocking was covered by some fancy hammering, with a young bouldered door swung open, and the captives marched out. "Hurry up, Mr. Tooey," said Corcoran. "We ought to be getting back. Will you give us that note, please?" "Some of you young gentlemen was driven my cattle off the burrows," said Vidley. "I give fair warning, ill tell ye masters. I know you." He glared at Corcoran with malignant recognition. McTurk looked him over from head to foot. "Oh, it's only old Vidley drunk again, I suppose. Well, we can't help that. Come on, Mr. Tooey, well go to your house." "Drunk? Am I ill drunk? How do I know you bain't the same lot? Abram, did he take their names and numbers?" "What is he ravin' about?" said Beetle. "Can't you see that, if we'd taken your beastly cattle, we shouldn't be hanging round your beastly barn pond? My Sam, you Burroughs governors haven't any sense." "Let alone gratitude," said Corcoran. "I suppose he was drunk, Mr. Tooey, and you locked him in the barn to get sober." "Shockin', oh shockin'." Vidley denied the charge in language that the boys' mothers would have wept to hear. Well, go and look after your cows, then, said McTurk. Don't stand there cursing us. Because we've been kind enough to help you out of a scrape. Why on earth weren't your cows milked before you? Ray, no farmer, it's long past milking. No wonder they're a half-crazy, disreputable old bog-trotter. You are brush your hair, sir. I beg your pardon, Mr. Toohey. Hope we're not keeping you. They left Vidley dancing on the muck heap amid the cows, and devoted themselves to propitiating Mr. Toohey on their way to his house. Exercise had made them hungry. Hunger is the mother of good manners, and they won golden opinions from Mrs. Toohey. 3/4 of an hour late for callover, and 15 minutes late for lockup, said Foxy, the school sergeant crisply. He was waiting for them at the head of the corridor. Report to your housemaster, Pleason. A nice mess you're in, young gentlemen. Quite right, Foxy. Strict attention to duty. Does it, said Corcoran. Now, where if we asked you, would you say that His Honor Mr. Prout might at this moment of time be found prudential in his study as usual, Mr. Corcoran? He took callover. Hurrah, luck's with us all the way. Don't blub, Foxy. I'm afraid you don't catch us this time. We went up to change, sir, before common to you. That made us a little late, sir. We weren't really very late. We were detained be an errand of mercy, said Beetle, and they laid Mrs. Toohey's laboriously written note before him. We thought you'd prefer a letter, sir. Toohey got himself locked into a barn, and we heard him shouting, it's Toohey who brings the caul milk, sir, and we went to let him out. There were ever so many cows waiting to be milked, said McTurk, and of course he couldn't get at them, sir. They said the door had jammed. There's his note, sir. Mr. Prout read it over thrice. It was perfectly unimpeachable, but it said nothing of a large tea supplied by Mrs. Toohey. Well, I don't like your getting mixed up with farmers and potwallopers. Of course, you will not pay any more visits to the Tooheys, said he. Of course not, sir. It was really on account of the cows, sir, replied McTurk, glowing with philanthropy. And you came straight back? We ran nearly all the way from the cattle gate, said Corcoran, carefully developing the unessential. That's 1 mile, sir. Of course, we had to get the note from Toohey first. But it was because we went to change you, were rather wet, sir, that we were really late, after we'd reported ourselves to the sergeant, sir, and he knew we were in call. We didn't like to come to your study all dirty. Sweeter than honey was the voice of Beetle. Very good, don't let it happen again. Their housemaster learned to know them better in later years. They entered, not to say swaggered, into number 9 form room, where De Vitter, Orrin Parsons, and Howlett, before the fire, were still telling their adventures to admiring associates. The 4 rose as one boy. What happened to you? We just saved callover. Did you stay on? Tell us. Tell us. The 3 smiled pensively. They were not distinguished for telling more than was necessary. Oh, we stayed on a bit, and then we came away, said McTurk. That's all. You scab, you might tell a chap, anyhow. Think so? Well, that's awfully good of you, De Vitter Pan, my sainted Sam. That's awfully good of you, said Corcoran, shouldering into the center of the warmth, and toasting one slippered foot before the blaze. So you really think we might tell you? They stared at the coals and shook with deep, delicious chuckles. My hat, we were stalky, said McTurk. I swear we were about as stalky as they make 'em, weren't we? It was a frabjous stalk, said Beetle. Much too good to tell you brutes, though. The form wriggled under the insult, but made no motion to avenge it. After all, on De Vitter's showing, the 3 had saved the raiders from at least a public licking. It wasn't half bad, said Corcoran. Stalky is the word. You were the really stalky one, said McTurk. One contemptuous shoulder turned to a listening world. By gum, you were stalky. Corcoran accepted the compliment, and the name together. Yes, said he, keep your eye on your Uncle Stalky, and hell pull you through. Well, you needn't gloat so, said De Vitter viciously. You look like a stuffed cat. Corcoran, henceforth known as Stalky, took not the slightest notice, but smiled dreamily. My hat, yes, of course, he murmured. Your Uncle Stalky, a deuced good name. Your Uncle Stalky is no end of a stalker. He's a great man. I swear he is. De Vitter, you're an ass, a putrid ass. De Vitter would have denied this, but for the assenting murmurs from Parsons and Orrin. You needn't rub it in then. But I do it as you are such a whopping ass do you know, it think over it, a bit at prep think it up in bed oblige, me by thinking of it every half hour, till further notice gummy, what an ass you are, but your Uncle Stalky picked up the form-room poker, and beat it against the mantel-pieces, a great man. Hear, hear, said Beetle and McTurk, who had fought under that general. Isn't your Uncle Stalky a great man de Vitter? Speak the truth, you fat-headed old impostor. Yes, said de Vitter, deserted by all his band, I suppose he is. Mustn't suppose, is he? Well, he is. A great man. A great man, now won't you tell us, said de Vitter pleadingly. Not by a heap, said Stalky Corcoran. Therefore the tale has stayed untold till today.